since everybody else is here. I will now call the June 25th, 2024 City Council special meeting to order at 6:04. Thank you all for being here. We'll go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. A wonderful article in here. It says Coburg, a Mayberry for the modern age. And so Megan Dompe and Main Street's folks were instrumental in getting this. It has a wonderful article and beautiful colored pictures about Coburg. So I thought that was pretty exciting. I just saw that today. And
Mayor, there are extra copies that Megan said if
Oh.
you're interested, we can get a few more.
Okay. Yeah, we're just hoping it doesn't bring too many people flooding in, but you know, who knows?
Not all.
It is sometimes a mixed blessing, but it is very well done. Megan says this is the first of many things to come, and I think that's a great demonstration of how Main Street and the city of Coburg and we as council and the community can all work together to make this very special place even better. So that's really all I have for the good of the order. We have agenda review is next. Are there any proposed changes to tonight's agenda? Yes, make sure your microphones are on and we're speaking into them. Thank you for that reminder. Hearing none, we'll go ahead and move on. Is there anyone signed up to speak tonight? No. Okay. Then we'll be looking at our ordinances and resolutions. So we will need 2 motions to pass this ordinance, and Mr. Hanks will go through that as we move forward. So I'll now open the public hearing at 6:07 and hold the first reading of ordinance A-256, an ordinance to limit the liability for recreational use of certain city property and declare an emergency for adoption.
Good evening, Council. This item, this recreational limit liability for recreational use is part of the package that we've talked about a number of times since the Oregon Supreme Court case on recreational immunity, where the case was surprisingly put holes in recreational immunity statewide. What occurred was interesting in that the legislature did move forward in the short session and rectify the majority of the issues associated with that court case. So that restored automatically the majority of our recreational immunity. What came about that was kind of surprising to many cities and councilors, and actually CIS as well when it was first making the rounds, is this other piece that is a different Oregon Revised Statutes that requires an opt-in for any city under 500,000. So anybody besides Portland has to proactively opt in to cover trails. And trails, my understanding of the state legislative history was, for some reason, that was not part of the original recreational immunity statutes, and it was added or amended or clarified. And for some reason, the opt-in piece only for that section of ORS. So it's a pretty limited liability that's out there, but with it all coming, to a head and having kind of concerned about having no recreational immunity, this one was recommended. And so across the state, people were realizing, oh, in addition to the work that the state legislature did for cities and property owners that allow recreational use, this one was smart for cities to also opt into, to kind of close as many holes as possible. And it really, for us, it's limited to probably its limit are the Booth Kelly Trail. It's for unimproved trails primarily. And so I think historically recreational immunity way back did not cover that. And as that became more prevalent, that cities had kind of dirt trails and kind of more hiking than other stuff that came into ORS. So that is this draft ordinance was put together by LCOG legal staff. All cities in the region that use LCOG, I think, are either have or in the process of putting this ordinance through. It can be done by resolution or ordinance. We chose ordinance because that is kind of the full effect of the law. LCOG staff indicated that's if you're going to shrink the gaps of exposure, or an ordinance shrinks it even a little bit more than a resolution shrinks it. So that's where we went with this. Last meeting, or actually the May council meeting, we had a discussion item about this, and the question that staff brought up was, is council comfortable with doing it as emergency ordinance? We missed the June, with all the budget hearings, we missed having the ordinance published and posted in the adequate required time. So we weren't able to do that in the June meeting. But council did agree that, closing up that liability felt kind of administratively at least qualified for an emergency. So in front of you tonight is the ordinance itself that is very, very similar, but for formatting mostly from what was in the packet in May. And the motion that I have in the council communication, Sammy and I worked on it a little bit more after that was published. And I think Sammy recommended, and I agree, that we should split those into two, because one of the motions just requires a majority. The other one requires unanimous. So it probably wouldn't matter, but technically it's appropriate to split those. So what the procedure tonight, I'll just jump into that and we can go back to the content of the ordinance if you have any questions. But the procedural is the charter allows to do first reading, and then if council by unanimous vote can waive the second reading, and then the declaration of emergency waives the 30-day effective period. So there are multiple things that you're doing. You're potentially waiving a second reading, and by declaration of emergency, you are typically, ordinances go into effect 30 days after approval of council. With an emergency, you can remove that 30 days. So the objective tonight procedurally, if you're in agreement, would have this ordinance go into effect after your vote tonight. It would eliminate those other two steps. But there are some charter rules to break that apart. So Sammy's crafted kind of two separate ordinances to make sure that or two separate motions, to make sure. So that's a little highlight of the topic and of the process procedure, and glad to answer any questions.
Just on page 4, I don't know if it's significant, but where it explains the cities with populations fewer than 500, it says Bend.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to mention that. That's in my staff report. So the ordinance was cleaned with Coburg only.
Okay.
That was material that I lifted and did not that our LCOG staff provided us, and I did not catch that until too late. I noticed that as well, but it was far too late. So the ordinance that we're adopting is clean with Coburg only statements. So sorry about that.
So this applies to both unimproved pathways, walkways in our parks, as well as improved pavement areas.
Sort of, yes. It's more limited than the recreational immunity that the state rectified with. They added basically into the ordinance, because the Supreme Court case, the Oregon Supreme Court, the crux of it was walking, was that covered under recreational immunity or not? Walking to a place to recreate. Was the walking itself recreating, or were they walking to a place and then to recreate? That was the whole crux. Ordinance covers these unimproved trails. So they kind of overlap each other, but this covers a little slice. I think some communities aren't doing this at all because they're not worried about the other slice. It's a pretty minute slice, but this just covers our bases. If somebody were to be, and my take was on an unimproved trail, they could make at least attempt to make a case that the regular recreational immunity that the state legislature fixed in the February short session did not cover unimproved trails adequately, and they would use this other ORS that we're referencing here as a means to avoid recreational immunity and have a claim against the city. And this closes that up.
So which specific properties or grounds does this cover for us?
I would say this one covers Booth Kelly Trail primarily. That would be the spot that's somewhat at risk. I would say it's not, it's different attorneys would say how much it's at risk. If it's covered, I think normally you'd feel safe going into court saying the recreational immunity generally would cover Booth Kelly. This is the one that Booth Kelly probably most closely covers, and potentially the extension past the pave area of Trails End, the dirt
Would
part.
it also just cover our parks as well?
This sort of does, but the main recreational immunity, everyone feels very comfortable that formalized parks, not the unimproved open space kind of stuff, but the formalized parks is very covered by the stuff that the state legislature rectified. So,
Just an extension and clarification that we want our unimproved.
right. And we
areas.
probably would prevail on a claim without this, but this, somebody could say, well, oh, wait about you didn't opt into this little slice. And it requires this to opt in to get that extra bits. And I don't know how you define the extra, but yeah, it's kind of deep in the risk management legalese, really.
And I can follow up. I've not been real happy with all the biking that's been done in our, but also I initially brought it up a year ago because I thought we had some liability of the bike jumps and those kinds of activities. Most of the time it was not on our property, but it was accessed by the trail. And I guess we looked into that and said that probably doesn't expose our liability, but we did have a little conversation that do we really want to have bicycles on that trail?
Right.
There's a couple places that you could come around a corner where somebody's walking and it's kind of a blind turn, and sometimes those bicycles are going, couple 2 or 3 at a time and somewhat, fast. Not that we need to discuss that tonight, but just
Right.
at some point in time, want to know if we even want to have the liability of having bicycles on that trail.
If you're interested as a group to have that be a discussion point, I would suggest, direct us to bring that forward to Parks Committee and get a take from them, and then we could bring it back it's not a big rush, but you're right. That would be addressed by, signage at each end saying that this is a walking path, bicycles prohibited. That'd be my suggestion. If there's a majority there and we can throw that on a future Parks Committee agenda, get their take, provide our take of costs and enforcement and, all the things that go around it. And then we can bring it back to council but that's up to you all if you want to direct us that way.
I know that in the past, when I was on Parks Committee, I think we did address that, and I remember some talk about it, so there may be some history already there for what the parks recommended.
Good. We can dig through that and
So
we have a park staff expert there somewhere in the back, I think, that we can.
is the direction of council to have staff pursue this, investigate.
I would
Just
like,
count.
I need to understand the question. The question is limiting the liability or limiting the use of bikes on a certain trail?
Well, we diverged, Counselor Fox. You are absolutely correct. So I think we've addressed the limiting liability. And Counselor Lehman has raised the question about should we ask staff to further investigate the limitation of bikes on that trail?
And Mayor, could I suggest maybe that we also do it outside of our public hearing? We may want to,
That
we
is
can
an
put it
excellent. thank
right
you.
after the supplemental.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I wasn't,
Yes.
I instigated it, so I.
All your fault.
It is.
So, is there anyone signed up to speak on this ordinance? Okay, then I will.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, I am so sorry.
Get
Of
my hand
course.
up. So you keep on saying unimproved, but I'm reading that it says, earth and walkway, gravel path, multi-use path, and multi-use trail, which covers even improved areas. Would I be correct?
Yeah, paths and trails. And I think I was trying to discern, and it's really hard because they overlap, discern the difference between kind of our formal parks and more of the open space recreation areas. But these do have an overlapping function, and that's why the recommendation from legal staff is to get both just in case. So we don't have one coverage and assume we're all good and have an avenue for a claim and a lawsuit utilizing this area, but there is overlapping.
Okay, yeah, because I was thinking of Skinner Butte, which is Eugene, I guess, Park, but it is pretty rough.
Yeah, and
And
multi-use doesn't necessarily denote what the surface is. Multi-use can be, you're right, in different conditions of surface.
Yeah,
And
it's
the part
just broadly covering all things that may not be a park, but it might have a sidewalk there.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. Yeah, and then it would be debatable, did the other part cover it? But did this, and so this ensures that we have both pieces. You're right. It isn't, it's,
Doesn't have to be a dirt trail. It can be more.
it could be more.
Okay.
Right.
Any other questions, comments? If not, I will close the public hearing at 6:22. And I believe Mr. Hanks has already discussed why we have the two separate ordinances and how those will work. So the first motion that I will entertain is to waive the second reading of ordinance A-265.
I'll move to waive the second reading of ordinance A-256.
I have a motion by Counselor Engebretson. Do I have a second?
Second.
Done.
You was first.
Counselor Fox. Okay. So we have a motion by Counselor Engebretson and a second by Counselor Fox to waive the second reading of ordinance A-256. Is there any further discussion? Not, I'll have a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Any opposed? The motion passes 4-0. Thank you. And now we have the second, I will entertain a motion and a second to adopt ordinance A 256, an ordinance to limit the liability for recreational use of certain city property and declare an emergency for adoption. So what we're doing now is adopting ordinance A-256.
Mayor, there's a little script here if somebody wanted to see. It's kind of amended a little bit.
On page 3, is that what you're looking at, Kathy?
Anybody? It's here.
Oh,
No, anybody?
Well, you and I have that.
the wording.
I think the,
So we've waived the second reading, and now we're down to the motion and second to adopt ordinance A-256, an ordinance to limit liability for recreational use of certain city property and declare an well, we've already declared the
No,
emergency.
no, the actual second, you've waived the second reading, so we
Alright.
still, this includes
So
the
this would be-
declaration of emergency,
So this would be the motion to move that forward.
adopting the ordinance and declaring the emergency, yeah.
I move to approve first and second reading, the waived second reading and declaration of emergency of ordinance A-256, an ordinance to limit the liability for recreational use of certain city property.
I'll second.
For Smith, we have a motion by Counselor Fox and a second by Counselor Smith to adopt ordinance A-256, an ordinance to limit the liability for recreational use of certain city property and declare an emergency for adoption. Is there any further discussion? Okay, if not, all those in favor, please raise your hands. Or any opposed? No. Ordinance passes 4-0. Motion passes. Thank you very much. Now we're moving on to resolution 2024-08, a resolution adopting a supplemental budget and making appropriations for the city of Coburg for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2023 and ending just next week, June 30th of 2024. So it's not next year's budget, it's this year's budget. There will be a staff report from Mr. Hanks.
Yes, thank you. The key piece of that is ending next week. So this item is, as the mayor described, a supplemental budget, and it's done by resolution. So there's a resolution in the packet for you that addresses three appropriation level areas that we said, we mentioned at last meeting that the May financial report show those three lines being really right at the target, the 92.5%, the 11/12 of the year from fully hitting the appropriation level. It's possible, by the way, we balance and submit PERS for salaries, there's a possibility, by the way, the days break on salary, on pay schedules, that we wouldn't go over. But it's really, really close. So the request is to recognize that these three areas were budgeted very tightly, and may go over. I'm fairly confident they won't go over by the amounts that we've requested in the appropriation transfers. If and when those don't go over by any or by much at all, what ends up happening is they just roll back into the carry forward budget. They're not spent. They're just back into the same estimated carry forward that we used for the budgeting for the new fiscal year. So, I think budgeted very closely. And I think if you look at revenues for the same in the 11th month, they were budgeted very closely, very accurately to where they're going to end. So I don't think there's anything wrong at all. I think one of the in administration, what may have put a little bit more strain on that appropriation level was having the two city administrators overlap for a month and then having a retirement in the city administrator position with payouts that may have been estimated, but that may not have been exact. So I think that probably contributes to that. But again, they are, I'll report back just out of curiosity at the very least to let you know where that, and you'll see it on the financial reports too, but where that ends up. But this is a bit precautionary. And I think also something that we've talked about as staff that we want to make sure that we're tracking this and it's not altogether, out of ordinary to have a supplemental in June. Other cities pretty much as a course of business will do one in December and one in June to just make course corrections. And as I think we talked about last month, supplementals often are, you got a grant that you didn't know you were going to get, that you have to do a supplemental for revenue, matching revenue if you're going to expend and where you're going to spend it from. We're proposing this because there's no associated revenue to this, that it come out of contingency if it occurs. But supplementals are used for a lot of different things, for budgetary compliance and the ability to spend. And and again, included in the packet is the actual resolution for this budget year that we're in, that gives you a sense of what levels they're appropriated at. And that's what we use in the final 2 pages of our monthly financial reports, is we check against that resolution, because that is what the council has set as our maximum spending authority. And to do anything more requires a formal request to you. More than 10% would require a full public hearing, different noticing, all of that. So under 10% requires the ability for a public comment, but not a full public hearing, and it changes some noticing requirements, simplifies it a little bit.
Any questions from council? Counselor Fox.
Hey, I like the idea of reviewing the budget in December. I think that's a great idea. Even though there were 2 administrators and a payout, I assume that was perceived to be happening prior to the budget, possibly. So in next year's budget is a little more wiggle room for unanticipated retirements, anticipated retirements, and what they call us.
Hope so. A little. Yeah. It is a fine line about how tight you do it. The tighter you are, the more you can squeeze that budget to get other things done as well. But yes, I mean, the goal there is to do that. There, like I said, there are some timing things with payroll sometimes that come into play, and some anticipated stuff.
The unpredictable.
Yeah, and I think that will be something that is ripe for that December. Looking at November, December, and if the need is there in December to do like a January supplemental, I think that review, I think, would be good to see if we're tracking. At least note it and have a conversation about it, and maybe there's enough cushion there that it's like, well, we don't really need to do a supplemental now, but here's the ones we want to make sure we call out each month we look at financials. But yeah. The hope and plan is that we don't, on the materials and, materials side of things, not on the people side. It's not uncommon to have, an emergency equipment failures, that things that are really easy to look at and go, that's why we have something go awry. That's pretty common, I would say, on supplementals is a major.
One more question.
Yes. Counselor
Um,
Lehman.
Were there any like overtimes or temporary employees or the contract employees that contributed to this?
There's a mixture. And this is again, in this fiscal Yes, the contract professional services in the material side. So that is within, that was within five, I think that only contributed 5,000 of the total here. So it was predominantly salaries, but a very small amount of this was non-salary. And this is all general fund, not in the other operating funds. Trying to figure out exactly, since I didn't do the budget myself, it's hard to know exactly where this would be in 11 months of the 12 months. What was the straw that kicked it over? Because it depends on. I would bet Ann could probably look at it and go, it was probably the combination of this and this, or something. I don't have that background to be able to do it. It'll be much easier to answer that question, during this next year. But the predominant, like I said, probably, at least 45, if not 50,000 of this total between the two areas is in the personal services, not in the goods and services. And that's where contract services would be. It's not in payroll.
Any other questions?
More
Councilmember
of just
Smith?
out of curiosity or a comment, it seems like we haven't done another supplemental budget yet this year, have we? I think so.
Not to my
Which kinda-
knowledge.
I guess that's a good, kind of illustrates that overall things went pretty well to plan.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the only supplemental budget we're considering this year, so.
Yeah. And I would say that this isn't, this is possibly we're not going to go over. It's just one of a budgetary compliance thing that we really, it is a budget violation. It's a big deal to go beyond your appropriations, like a really big deal that we never want to be in. So, this is maybe a little overkill precautionary on our side, but we do not want a budget violation. And even if it's nominal, doesn't really matter. You go over that line, you go over that line. But yes, I think this is still solid budgeting. I think, it's, like I said, it's hard to pin it because it's so slight. There's not anything obvious. And I will report back on really where we ended up, and you'll see that we'll call it out in the financial reports to see, were we 1% over? Were we 5% over? I doubt we'll be more than 5% over in any one of these three line items, which would be less than the 55 that we're asking for, just to be sure.
Any other questions, comments? Not, I will entertain a motion. Second, to approve resolution adopting the supplemental budget and making appropriations for the city of Coburg for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2023 and ending June 30th, 2024.
I move to approve resolution 2024-08, adopting a supplemental budget, making appropriations for the city of Coburg for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2023 and ending June 30th, 2024.
Second. Lyman, and a second by Counselor Smith to approve resolution 2024-08, a resolution adopting a supplemental budget, making appropriations for the city of Coburg for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2023 and ending June 30th of 2024. Any further need for discussion? No. So at this point, I'll ask all those in favor to raise their hand. Any opposed? The motion carries 4-0. I was getting all excited.
Just-
All right, we have council comments are the next on the agenda, and that is allowing time for council to report back on their various liaison committees. Counselor Fox, anything you wanted to share with us? Or anything out of, it doesn't have to just be a liaison report.
Actually, I was gonna comment on what we just did, and you said it's a big red flag to go over. I've worked with city budgets or county budgets, government budgeting. And there are certain areas where if you go certain percentage under, you can lose that budget. And I've worked with Blaine County where stingy, 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 and the last 2 months, they're shoveling money at you because they don't wanna, that's a ridiculous way to budget.
Mhm.
But no, I am in Park Treaty Committee. If that was last week, I missed it. Hopefully it's tomorrow.
Hey, Brutson.
I don't think I have any new updates on the ad hoc, or not ad hoc, the Lane Act. We're still the Oregon, what is it, Joint Committee on Transportation from the Oregon State Legislature is still scheduled to come out later in July to make a list for their listening tour to this area, to the Lane Act area. So we are going to meet again on our regularly scheduled time in early July and just kind of discuss, I think the committee is going to discuss, rather than focusing on projects and things like that, talking about just ideas for how the Oregon legislature might go about trying to fund the roads, and maintenance of the roads in particular is one of the things that the Oregon Department of Transportation is very concerned about, because their maintenance budget just isn't keeping up. The funding mechanism they have for it is not keeping up at all with inflation or the need. So, same story, just.
So we are, staff is looking to see if we can have a presence at the at the table to actually do the discussions. And our understanding, you are absolutely correct. It's still sort of a moving target in terms of what will be presented, but it looks like it's going to be more on how do we fund this increase, not specific projects, though projects will be presented, we think, based on, want to replace this bridge. Well, that's how many $1 million, and according to ODOT, there are already $2 billion with a B dollars behind in being able to do projects just. So this is going to require a large appropriation, and there has not been a large appropriation since 2017, if I remember correctly, for ODOT. That was a while ago. And though they still have projects that they weren't able to address, that they'd hoped to address based on that money, but they're not going to get to those. We have quite a backlog within this state. And I'm sure we're seeing, the rise in electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles that use less gas is great for the environment. But the downside is we all use that gas tax to maintain our roads. And how do we do that? How do we do that? None of us want to raise fees, but it all comes down to what's going to cost us, honestly, to do the projects that we want to see. That's my 2 cents on that too, Councilor. It is a conundrum. I will absolutely agree. I sit on the Lane Act Steering Committee, and so I do a lot of listening. Councilor Lehman, anything from you for the good of the order?
Well, the planning commission meeting in June, I think, was postponed or canceled.
Yeah, it was canceled for, to
Until.
queue up the July one. Yeah.
That will be rescheduled, or next one is what date?
It is July 17th, and that is the one, we'll get an invite out to all of you because that's our DLCD rep will be doing a presentation there that I think will be very worthwhile. So we'll send something out to Patrick Wingard. He's an engaging speaker, I think, and really knowledgeable. He's going over kind of the comp plan and development and all of that. I think it'd be a good one to, if you're available. So we will send something out, but that's July for Planning Commission.
Then we have the ad hoc transportation meeting on the 27th.
Yes, day after tomorrow.
Yeah, like this week.
Yeah, and that's at 4 o'clock.
Fourth.
Correct, 4 o'clock. Yes. Yep.
And do we have something scheduled for July 11th?
I don't,
We
Okay,
have July 23rd will be a city council work session,
correct. Then the regular session will be July 9th.
the 9th.
right.
That's all I have.
Counselor Smith. Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so the
Finance
what's,
audit.
yeah, the finance audit is actually, it's, I think the way way it reads, it's the last Tuesday of the month,
It'll be
which
July
typically is,
30th.
yeah, which is typically the fourth
Yeah.
Tuesday, but it happens to be the fifth Tuesday on that month. So they are the 30th, and the council work session, like the mayor mentioned, on our water system update, will be a council meeting on the 23rd, and a finance audit committee then is the 30th.
I forget I have two documents in front of me.
Can you repeat those dates?
July 23 is the fourth Tuesday is the council work session on water system. And then the following Tuesday, the 30th, is the finance audit committee.
And did Parks and Tree plant the trees or did?
Well, Public Works planted the trees, sorry about that, and they were donated. Is that correct, Brian? All three were donated?
Right. Did council want to direct staff to follow up on bikes on the trail?
I think if I liked the Counselor Smith's idea, if the Park and Tree Committee has discussed it already, maybe kind of revisiting that, or maybe even just having them discuss it again. That seems like a good place to start with that.
If you wanted to, I could maybe, Mr. Harmon, we could put that on the agenda for the next meeting to bring back what that discussion and that what their input was, and then I could report it back as part of my liaison or.
Well, I think if you're wanting it back, I mean, I'd suggest an agenda item for bringing it back. If you want to give formal direction on what feedback you get from staff and the committee,
Be
We-
September
right.
probably before we got that. I would
right,
guess.
the July park, I think you're right. That's a good spot we can put it on the July park agenda, and we're not meeting in August, so it'd be the September meeting that it would be back. And we could do an agenda item, not necessarily geared, and dialed up for a decision, a resolution or anything like that, but it could be a formal discussion item. And we would incorporate then whatever the parks recommendation might be, as well as some staff input for you.
Would it be helpful to, instead of me relaying what their decision was, would it be helpful for one of the Parks Committee members to come and speak at that time as to what the discussion was and what they see looking forward?
Yeah, I think that's fine. We definitely would formally capture the parks recommendation in our staff report. But if they also want to come and speak and.
Right.
Yeah.
Question, Counselor Lehman?
So just a clarification, I didn't know when that discussion occurred and whether the committee was aware of the activities with kids doing the bike jumps and all that was going on, or
Yeah.
that's happened since the discussion.
I want to say it was around the bike jumps because that was causing some concern, but like I said, I'm not real clear. It's been a while. But I do remember the discussion, but I'm not real clear as to everything that was discussed and recommended at that time.
We can bring forward that conversation and that recommendation, as well as, how we would go if you're wanting to regulate that, what it would cost, what kind of mechanism we would use. Would it apply to only that trail? Does it apply to other places? All that kind of stuff, that just package that and you can then give formal direction at that time. So really, I was just thinking about if you have general consensus that it's worthy of us kind of poking at it, collecting information, bringing it back to you. We could definitely do that.
Mr. Fox?
I think gathering more information is prudent, and also by posting it in July, we could get citizens' input on their perspective on bike jumping and area parks.
Mhm.
I do worry a bit about enforcement,
Mhm.
as with all things.
And there's
Um,
also the limitation, dirt biking is a very big pastime for a lot of people,
It is indeed.
and we've just covered our. Want to go further.
Yeah, we've covered our liability
Thank you.
issues.
Yeah, as with most ordinances, I spent a good time doing code enforcement over the years, and it's kind of the 80-20 rule. You post it, and you end up typically getting 80% compliance, and then you have to figure out what you're going to do with the 20%. That's kind of just the industry standard of kind of human nature and how it works. And that's part of that discussion, definitely from the staff side, would be what level of enforcement to be able to expect, and what is that of moving forward, yes or no. That's still clearly an open policy question for you all, but we can talk more about the enforcement piece. But that's just to plant the seed that it's typically an 80-20 thing. You'll find that most ordinance and code enforcement ends up being it is complied with 80-ish% of the time without doing much besides signage.
And also would be helpful if there's been any citizens' complaint forms filed in the last year, that we would also be aware of those in case there has been more people that have weighed in that we're not really aware of.
There's been zero on that topic, but other than a counselor conversation.
And speaking of enforcement and citizen concerns, as we approach the 4th of July, there are always questions about fireworks being annoying, or were they illegal, or were they too close to the house, or were they dangerous? So again, we do not have an ordinance within this city prohibiting fireworks. And we are, our law enforcement team is driven by calls and
Mhm.
citizen concerns. So if you have neighbors coming to you saying, well, then if they think it's dangerous, that should be a 911 call.
That's helpful.
And the first thought that comes to mind on an ordinance on fireworks is a distinction between fireworks in the city limits or fireworks on public property. Is there a distinction?
We have no ordinance. Most cities do not, particularly cities our size. And the input that I've gotten back from the mayor's group, and there has been a lot of discussion about it, is that they are citizen concern driven, that it's just too hard for particularly small cities to adjudicate, but I think you could carry that out to larger cities.
Where I was prior in Ashland, we were the first city in the state that did prohibit it. It was a big to do. Our fire chief was very adamant and took the heat and did the roadshow to the Chamber of Commerce, to all the groups, and it's been in place for over 15 years. And there's still, the 80-20 rule still applies. But and that's obviously Southern Oregon is a much more fire prone area. I'm not advocating, I'm not saying either way, but I definitely have some experience with that. We could provide some places that do around the state, but I would still say more don't than do. Have ordinances specifically for that. But to get to your question, Councilor Lehman, there's some language in there about where it was allowed and where it was excluded. So it wasn't an outright prohibition. It constrained it though, and I'm not sure if that's exactly the angle you were talking about, but it
I
can go
could
both
see-
ways. You can do it the other way around too, and really worry about your liability on the public site.
Yeah, I can see the difference between someone having fireworks in their backyard or on the street, perhaps, but also a distinction in a park.
Right.
Or
Yep.
pathway or on city property.
Couple different ways to craft it, depending on what the focus area might be, the concern area. But yeah, we're clearly beyond that for this year. But maybe that's a retreat conversation.
But we'll try and get some sort of reminder out to
Yep.
the public, probably on the Facebook or on the city website, that be conscious of your neighbors, of people that might be more susceptible or sensitive to loud bangs. That there are veterans with PTSD, and that can be very disturbing. There are certainly animals that are disturbed. They run away. Every year we hear that on the news, that they've run away because they got frightened. It's just, some of it is common courtesy. People like fireworks. Didn't grow up with them, so that's just not what I do. We went to a firework display and that was sort of it. We did sparklers. So-
Didn't take all those firecrackers apart and make bigger
Oh,
ones.
no. We weren't allowed to do things like that. We lived on a farm, and a grass seed farm, and it would just go up like a tinderbox. So no, that wasn't part of my childhood.
Missed
But it-
out.
But it is for many. It
Missed
is.
out.
So it's a concern, and I'm sure there would be pushback either way, whichever way we decide to. So anything else for the good of the order? You have clear directions in terms of what staff is being asked to do?
I think so. I think that was general head nods towards doing some digging on that and give you back some information from Parks Committee and staff on what that might look like, but falling short of crafting actual code language.
All right, well, thank you all very much. And with that, I will adjourn our council meeting at 6:57. There's one for the record books, I think.